The night on the Baltic is a soft, iron-colored thing. The sea here is brackish and cold. The wind patient. The horizon a line of pewter that refuses to brighten until it decides to. Somewhere between Sweden and Finland, the bottom falls away to a floor made of Ice Age memory scars, grooves, and stones that once rode a glacier like slow thunder. In 2011, a boat drifted over that old floor, trailing a side-scan sonar towfish, the way a moth trails a shadow. The machine whispered its pings. The screen returned its stipples, and then, in the glitter of noise, a circle began to form. It is startling, the way a round shape asserts itself in a place made by ice and chance. The crew that saw it first were not scientists, but treasure hunters professionals at reading seabed ghostlight for wrecks. On the monitor, the formation looked like a disc. 60 meters wide, maybe more. Beside it, something that looked like a spur or a tail. A streak where the seafloor seemed brushed. In the ship's cabin, someone joked, "It looks like the Millennium Falcon at rest." Someone else said nothing at all and just leaned closer. You can travel the world to find weirdness, but often it's the water that brings it to you. The Baltic keeps secrets, the way a lichen keeps color patiently, obscurely, only showing the whole if you stay a long time. This is water that preserves wooden hulls like time capsules. Water that rolls cold over minds, anchored from other wars. Water that knows the weight of amber and the path of ancient traders. It is not an ocean of coral thrill or tropical spectacle. Its marvels are quieter. That is why, when a perfect circle appeared at 85 meters down, the world briefly turned its head. On the surface, facts and possibilities swapped places the way clouds cross a moon. The team that found a 10 outfit called Oceanic shared images that seemed to show a step-deep circular structure, a central rise, a broken-looking stairway on one side. Headlines did the rest. UFO, a prehistoric temple drowned when ice melted. A gun turret from a lost battleship. An art installation that somehow slipped the news until now. The truth, as always, is harder and more interesting. The seafloor was speaking in a language we only half understand. Listen to that language for a moment. Sonar draws with sound. It casts a cone, waits for a return, and measures the time it takes echoes to come home. The result is not a photograph, but a relief map of sound brightness. Hard things shine white. Shadows fall where the signal can't reach. Angles matter. So does the tilt of the towfish, the swell under the boat, the grain and softness of the sediment, the way a boulder with a flat face throws a rectangular shadow that has nothing to do with any human plan. And yet, in this case, the roundness persisted through passes. A shape insisted on being a shape. We will spend some time with that insistence. We'll sink with remote eyes through layers of cold, past the green of the sunlit sea to the gray where light gives up. WWII walk the line between the wonder that keeps people curious and the caution that keeps them honest. Along the way, WWII meet geologists who look at the anomaly and shrug. Of course, the eyes can make that endivis. Who swear their lights flickered and their compasses misbehaved when they hovered above the object. We will feel the pull of myth. The Baltic's drowned cities, the Finnish Sampoa, enigmatic machine that grinds plenty and fade humming on a seabed of legend, and will return, again and again, to the way the sonar drew a circle and asked us a question. The night is still. The tow cable vibrates with a tone you feel in your teeth. On the screen, the object sits like a coin dropped into a bed of ash. At its margins, the seabed lifts in terraces, or so it seems, as if steps had been carved in the glacial sill. There is an almost avenue leading up to one edge. No fish flit across as if the water is too cold even for movement to want to be caught here. There is a time for answers and a time for openings. This is the latter. The Baltic Sea Anomaly, as it will soon be named by those who need names, waits where the ice left it or where something else placed it. The boat idles in a gray dawn that isn't yet a dawn. The sonar pings somewhere in the world. A story clears its throat. What did the first touch feel like? The first pass, the first return, the first hush on deck, when a screen full of soft noise coughed up a ring. Let's go to that deck, to the men and women who live by finding what the sea refuses to surrender, and watch the moment when a circle changes their season. The Baltic Sea doesn't put on a show. You learn its moods through routine. The drone of the weather radio, the damp chill in a coil of rope, the subtle shift in an engine's hum, when a swell turns just so. The Ocean X crew, led by Peter Lindbergh and Dennis Seisberg, had spent years on this water. They weren't strangers to its secrets, having hunted for treasures like rare champagne and sunken ships and stories worth telling back on shore. In June of 2011, their towfish sonar was tracing its usual path across the floor of the Gulf of Bothnia. It was a day like any other, until the screen in front of them said it wasn't. Side-scan sonar images paint the world in grayscale bands, a moving ribbon where the seafloor's contours bloom and fade. The operator, eyes trained for the familiar shapes of rock and wreckage, noticed a geometry that just didn't belong. It wasn't the shadow of a ship's keel or the sharp angle of fallen timber. It was an almost perfect disk. The question hung in the air, starting as a quiet laugh before everyone leaned in closer. "What is that?" The screen kept drawing the picture. A raised center, like a hub. Around it, what looked like concentric terraces. On one side, a breaker feature that could be an entrance, or damage, or maybe even a staircase. And trailing behind it, a long streak of smudge across the seabed that looked for all the world like a path, a skid mark. The coordinates were kept under lock and key. That's just how this business works. You do UNT broadcast a major find until you know exactly what you have and how to keep it safe from poachers. But news like this has a way of leaking out, like wind through a crack in the wall. The story morphed as it spread. A UFO had been found on the seabed. A mysterious structure was lurking in the cold, silty hills of the Baltic. Someone pointed out it looked like the Millennium Falcon. Someone else argued it was a Stone Age monument, toppled into the water when the last ice age ended. Peter Lindbergh is not a man given to wild fantasy. He's a pragmatist, a diver who reads wrecks by instinct, feeling for where the wood ought to be and patiently testing it until it is. Yet, even he wasn't immune to the sense of awe. In interviews, you could hear it in his voice. The roundness was just odd. The sheer size was impressive. The sonar seemed to show features you simply don't expect from a natural rock formation. The team even nicknamed the long streak behind it a runway. They made a promise. They would return. Speculation is easy. Returning to a site nearly 90 meters deep is not. The Baltic's weather is notoriously fickle. The logistics of a deep-sea operation are a nightmare, and the cost of sending down a remotely operated vehicle, an ROV, or a team of divers is astronomical. Months slipped by. Winter descended, locking the sea in ice. The story hibernated in the media but never truly went away. Sketch artists drew a disc with fins. Animators added glowing lights under its rim. Online commenters compiled lists of possibilities. Forgotten Nazi super technology, an alien craft, the foundation of an ancient lighthouse from an era when the sea level was completely different. And all the while, out in the real sea, the object waited, silent and unchanged. What's striking about those first sonar images, once you get past their high-contrast drama, isn't just the perfection of the circle. It's how defiantly it stands out against the smeared, soft world around it. The seafloor there is a gently rutted plain, the afterimage of ice, current, and immense stretches of time. And then, right in the middle, is this thing that looks like architecture. If you've ever seen a coastline carved by glaciers, you know ice can leave behind strange shaped drumlins, like half-buried whales, or boulders perched in impossible positions, like a god with a patient sense of humor. But a clean, wide disk, it makes you furrow your brow. Stories multiply when information is scarce. The Ocean X crew shared just enough to fuel the public's wonder, but not enough to satisfy it. This had the predictable effect. People filled the gaps with the stories they were already carrying inside them. The sea does that. It shows you a shape and asks you to name it. And before you know it, you've revealed more about yourself than about the object. When the team finally returned in the summer of 2012, they brought divers, cameras, and neatly folded hopes. The divers would descend through the stratified water past layers of salinity and temperature so distinct you can feel them like sheets to land on a circle that had spent millennia hidden from weather and light. Some of the things they would report back would only deepen the mystery. Others would ground it firmly in rock and geology. In Aterk's, The shape on the screen was about to become a place, and places are always far more complicated than their first pictures. Welcome back. Let's descend. Imagine the Baltic Sea, a place where water changes its mind with depth. Near the surface, it's almost sweet, a collection of river water with a green pallor that can glow under a generous sun. But as you go deeper, the brine takes over. The cold becomes a tangible thing, and life slows to a sparser, more deliberate pace. Our destination is 85 meters down. At this depth, color is a distant memory, and sound becomes a private, muffled experience. This is where the divers went, following a line down into a gradient of quiet, to finally touch the circle that had been living in their minds for an entire year. What they found has become the stuff of legend, a story told and retold, each time with small changes. Like a classic fisherman's tale, they discovered a broad, circular formation rising from the seafloor. It was more of a platform than a mound, with a central rise. Along one edge was a feature the team nicknamed the Stair, though in photographs, it looks more like a broken ledge, or perhaps a collapsed arc of stone. The surface wasn't uniform at all. Some patches looked smooth, others were rough. Divers even reported spots that seemed to have a strange coating, something they vaguely compared to burned rock. And then there were the reports of equipment going haywire. A video camera that worked perfectly on the deck suddenly glitched out near the anomaly. A satellite phone showing full bars refused to connect until the boat drifted a significant distance away. One diver even described a strange tingling sensation along one side of his body as he got close to the edge of the structure. Now, these experiences are pure catnip for those of us hungry for wonder, but they're deeply ambiguous to everyone else. The sea is incredibly harsh on electronics, batteries, hate. The cold layers of salt water with different densities can bend and distort signals, and we have to remember, humans at that depth are not objective instruments. Nitrogen narcosis can play tricks on the mind, but just dismissing these reports isn't the same as explaining them. The divers shared their experiences, and those words took on a life of their own. They managed to bring up samples. Rock, taken from the surface, felt much harder than the silt surrounding it, which makes sense. Silt is just layers of fine dust, soft until it's compressed over eons. One diver described seeing what looked like a circle of stones near the center, almost as if someone had laid out an ancient hearth. Another spoke of a long groove on one side, the supposed runway that began flush with the structure and then trailed off into the murky obscurity of the seafloor. The footage from the remotely operated vehicle, the ROV, and the still photos are not the crystal-clear revelations you might hope for in a documentary climax. The water is thick with particles, hanging like a constant snowstorm. The powerful lights of the ROV throw hard cones of illumination, making edges seem sharper than they are and hollows appear much darker. But what has come through all that grain is a definite sense of mass and geometry. This anomaly is not some passing ripple in the sand or a trick of a single sonar ping its seat staring. It has a presence. However, to a geological eye, it's also covered in the signatures of natural processes. Fractures, sediment caught in low points, and other signs of wear and tear. The line between what is artificial and what is natural isn't a clear line at all. It's more like a murky field you have to cross, very, very slowly. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the talk was spinning much faster than the data could settle. The team hinted at magnetic oddities, at surfaces that seemed as smooth to be accidental, at details they swore they saw with their own eyes, but that the cameras had failed to capture. On the other side, scientists on land offered up explanations rooted in geology. They suggested it could be a bedrock knob scoured into a dome shape by ancient glaciers, then broken into steps by cycles of freezing and thawing. Or maybe it was a glacial moraine, compacted over millennia until it rang like solid stone. Another theory was that it was just a collection of boulders cemented together by thousands of years of chemical processes, creating a composite that reads like architecture to an untrained eye. But none of this killed the enchantment. If anything, it made the anomaly more itself, a thing that exists on the very edge of our categories. A disk in a field of natural flow, a place where equipment faltered and divers had to use their hands to tell their eyes what they were touching. This is the true texture of mystery itself. Not a tidy list of clues leading neatly to an answer. It's a thickening, a deepening of the unknown. The circle on the seabed became heavier, more real, but it also became much harder to name, and to name something properly, you have to see it better. That means we need to return to the very source of its visibility. The sonar that first drew its shape. In our next part, we're going to look at how sound paints a picture of the seabed, and how certain brush can mimic the shapes our minds are primed to see. This isn't about destroying the magic. It's about learning the rules of the medium, so that when something truly strange appears, you can understand just how odd it really is. Imagine you're in a pitch-black room, trying to figure out the shape of everything around you. What do? Maybe you'd throw small pebbles and listen to the echoes. A hard wall would send back a sharp asterisk. Ping asterisk. A soft curtain would just absorb the sound. That's essentially what we're doing on the seafloor with side-scan sonar. Just a lot more sophisticated. A device called a towfish is dragged behind a boat, sending out sound pulses to its left and right. The seafloor talks back. Hard surfaces like rock or metal shout, creating bright spots on the screen. Soft mud just whispers, appearing as dull gray. This process creates a picture, but it's not a photograph. It's a map of sound, a landscape of echoes and shadows. And these shadows are very real. When the sonar beam hits a raised object, like a wreck or a large boulder, it can't see what's behind it. That area goes black, creating a distinct shadow. This tells us the object has height. Ridges look like scallops, and trenches appear like long, dim smudges. But it's a tricky art. If you tilt the towfish even slightly, the object can look stretched or squashed. If the boat goes too fast, the image smears. It's a delicate balance to get a clear picture. Of course, the ocean is a messy place, and technology isn't perfect. We get what are called artifacts, ghosts in the machine. Sometimes, a sound pulse will bounce off multiple surfaces before returning, creating phantom rings or halos that aren't really there. A steep slope can look much sharper than it actually is. So, how do you trust what you see? You do it again and again. You make multiple passes over the same spot from different directions. If the same shape appears every single time, your confidence grows. And that's exactly what the Ocean X team did. The circular disc they found, it held its shape. Pass after pass. The mysterious streak behind it. That long scar on the seabed. Also remind. This is where imaginations really started to run wild. What could that streak be? It might be a scour mark, where currents, blocked by this hard object, have carved a path in the softer sediment. Or maybe it's just a trail of different material left behind as finer mud washed away. Or it could just be a technical glitch, an artifact exaggerated by the crew's own expectations, and the steps seen on the disk's rim. They could be natural rock layers, or the fractured edges of a glacial deposit. Sonar creates these ambiguous images, and our brains, naturally, try to fill in the blanks with things we already know. To get a clearer picture, you can use another tool. Multi-beam bathymetry. This technology sends out a wide fin of sound, building a 3D model of the seafloor. It's a huge step up, but it still has its own challenges. The water itself can play tricks on the sound waves. The Baltic Sea is famous for something called a halocline, a distinct layer, where fresh water from rivers sits on top of denser, salty water from the North Sea. This boundary isn't a straight line. It wavers and shifts. When a sound beam passes through this wavy glass, it gets bent, so it might arrive at a slightly different spot than you'd expect. There are ways to correct for this, but they aren't perfect. It's tempting to just dismiss strange readings as artifacts. It's an easy explanation, but then you have to ask, why do these specific artifacts keep showing up in this exact spot? On the other hand, it's just as tempting to jump to conclusions and say, look, those are clearly man-made steps. That's turning a simple change in brightness into a chisel mark. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the middle. The careful approach is to ask more questions. What else in this area looks like this under sonar? Are there other circular shapes? Yes, there are glacial formations, but very few that look like a perfect coin. How does its sound reflection compare to known rocks nearby? What happens if we scan it from a different direction? This isn't about killing the sense of wonder. It's about making sure that wonder is built on a solid foundation. If a mysterious circle survives every test, every correction, every different angle, then you have something far more powerful than just a sensational headline. And if divers then put their hands on it and confirm it's rock, you start asking a whole new set of questions. What kind of rock? How is it shaped? And by what? Ones were that we need to go back in time. Way back, before the first boats, before the ancient amber traders, before the Norsemen even named these waters. We have to journey to an age when this entire region was buried under a colossal sheet of ice. The floor of the Baltic Sea is like a book written by glaciers, and to understand this strange anomaly, we first need to learn how to read that ancient script. Imagine the weight, 2 kilometers of solid ice, a colossal dome pushing relentlessly southward. It grinds bedrock into fine flour, plucks boulders the size of houses, and carries them for miles. Beneath this immense pressure, water snakes through the darkness, finding every crack, every weakness in the rock below. It smooths sharp edges, carves deep grooves, and leaves a high polish that won't see the sun for thousands of years. This immense, slow-moving force is the opening chapter in the story of the Baltic Sea. When the last ice age finally began to release its grip, the ice didn't just vanish in a single thaw. It retreated in fits and starts, pulsing forward and back, like a slow, geologic heartbeat. Wherever it paused, it left behind ridges of stone, gravel, and silt-long, winding moraines that trace its resting spots across the landscape. Where it ground over harder rock, it sculpted them into formations resembling giant whales, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. It dropped boulders onto soft mud, and as currents washed away the sediment, a natural pedestal formed. This was not a quiet or simple retreat. It was a dramatic reshaping of the entire region. Now, let's look beneath the waves of the Gulf of Bothnia. The bedrock here is a patchwork of ancient granites and gneiss incredibly hard rocks. Overlying this foundation are layers of glacial till, sand, and clay. Sometimes, the bedrock pokes through these softer sediments, like bone breaking through skin. In this environment, minerals like iron and manganese can precipitate out of the water, coating stones in a dark skin. If you were looking for signs of a crash, you might mistake this dark coating for scorching from a fiery impact. When marine geologists first saw those now famous sonar images, they didn't see a crashed starship. They saw a familiar story written in stone. To them, the anomaly looked like a plausible bedrock outcrop, a hard knob of rock rising from the sediment plain. The so-called steps could be the result of a process called exfoliation, where sheets of rock peel away like layers of an onion due to pressure changes. The runway could be a scour mark, created by strong currents accelerating around the base of the knob, stripping away fine sediment and leaving a trail of coarser material. What looked like a staircase might just be a collapsed arc where a natural joint in the rock finally gave way. And what about the arranged stones? Glacial erratics, those boulders carried far from their homes by the ice, can be scattered all over a feature like this. The way they fall and settle can be influenced by gravity and the natural cracks in the rock, sometimes creating patterns that look deliberate. It could be chance, or it could be nature having a bit of theatrical flair. Over millennia, microbial mats grow and die, leaving behind textures that can look strangely purposeful. The seabed is a dynamic place, constantly being altered by slumping sediment, and even icebergs dropping their rocky cargo as they melt in the spring. Even the geologists who confidently dismiss the UFO theory admit, with a certain quiet fascination, that nature produces plenty of other strange, circular features. There are circular drumlins, which are elongated hills formed by glacial ice. Barakim terraces, which form neat benches around hills and in permafrost regions. You can find pingo-siscord mounds that leave behind donut-shaped depressions when they collapse. None of these are machines, but if you look at them from the right angle, they all look like discs. Herein lies the beauty of it. Natural doesn't mean boring. A bedrock outcrop shaped by the immense power of ice and the slow work of chemistry can be just as strange and fascinating as any story involving aliens, and it's certainly more useful. It's a single note in a grand symphony that includes the entire Baltic basin slowly rising, millimeter by millimeter, as it recovers from the weight of the ice. It's a story told in layers of water with different temperatures and salinities, and in the low oxygen depths that can mummify ancient wood for centuries. And yet, the divers who have been there still say it feels unusual, the sonar still draws a perfect, intriguing circle. There's enough room in our minds to hold both truths at once. The patient, logical explanation offered by geology, and that undeniable tingle of mystery that the divers felt. Holding both isn't a contradiction. It's a discipline and a pleasure. While Ice wrote most of this story, humans have been editing the margins for centuries. The Baltic Sea is a vast museum of shipwrecks, from magnificent warships to humble trading vessels. Its floor is littered with anchors, mines, cables, and even debris from the quiet tensions of the Cold War. Some of these man-made objects have their own magnetism, both literal and figurative. We're now going to drift into this historical lair, not to force a human explanation onto the anomaly, but to let the sea's rich archive expand the realm of possibilities. The cold waters of the Baltic Sea are like a time capsule. Down in its brackish depths, the past refuses to decay. Shipwrights' work, centuries old, remains almost untouched. Carvel planks still grip their iron nails. Ornate carvings on stern galleries stare out, as if they're just waiting for candlelight to flicker across them once more. It's an incredible sight. In some areas, shipwrecks are stacked on top of each other like books fallen from a shelf. Imagine a 17th century merchant vessel resting near a 20th century freighter each one. A library of forgotten stories. This underwater archive makes solving mysteries incredibly complex. When a sonar picks up a circular shape, what is it? It could be a turret from a warship, a circular gun platform, or even a tank's turret that was simply thrown overboard. The debris fields create a kind of chaotic geometry on the seafloor. The sea was once fenced with mine-smote spheres, bristling with deadly horns. Some broke free, drifted aimlessly, and eventually sank, appearing as a confusing ball on a plane to sonar readers a century later. Then there are the countless cables snaking between continents and the stumpy submarine towers rusting into lumps that perfectly mimic natural rock formations. It's like the sea is wearing a disguise. In the northern Baltic, this intense cold demands respect. Divers who venture down to these deep wrecks undergo extensive training and are incredibly picky about the weather. They speak of floating over decks where railings are still intact and portholes still hold their glass. They describe seeing the ship's name written in chalky marine growth, but they also talk about blank spaces. Areas where the seabed seems to have been planed perfectly smooth around some harder, unidentifiable form. The Baltic Sea Anomaly sits far from any known shipwreck clusters, which is both liberating and frustrating for investigators. If it were a gun platform, which nation would it belong to? If it were a caisson, or the foundation for a lighthouse, where are the official records? The team that discovered it was looking for champagne, so they would have recognized a shipwreck. They insisted it was not a ship. They described it as rock. Yet, for thousands of years, human hands have touched every part of this sea. Prehistoric people walked these lands. When the ice sheets retreated and the ground rose, they left stone circles on land that is now high and dry. Is it so impossible they left something below the waves? The question is tantalizing, but getting evidence from 85 meters deep is a difficult, jealous task. And then there's the magnetic interference left behind by war. World War II salted the Baltic with strange magnetic fields from sunken steel-hulled warships, power cables, and unknown ordnance that still faintly hums with the echo of its creation. In areas like this, instruments go haywire. A compass develops a mind of its own when it gets near these metallic ghosts. The reports of electronic failures near the anomaly could be explained by 100 modern phantoms, or by one simple, sober fact. Batteries hate the cold. The shadow of the Cold War also looms large here. Submarines patrolled these dark waters. It's plausible that experimental communication or listening devices were deployed and then lost. A platform dropped to the seabed for some forgotten, now classified purpose could settle into the sediment and look just like bedrock. Skeptics suggest these possibilities, and critical minds agree they're plausible. Yet the divers who saw it said rock. The samples taken lean that way. And still, the circle remains. But there's another archive to consider, the one found in stories told on land, around a warm fire. In these tales, the sea has a personality, and objects can become the stuff of legend. The Baltic is rich with folklore about drowned cities and mystical machines. A German legend tells of Veneta, a magnificent city swallowed by the sea, because of its pride, whose bells can sometimes be heard ringing beneath the waves. In the Finnish epic, the Kalevala, the mysterious Sampo, a mill that grinds out endless flour, salt, and gold shatters, and falls into the sea, its fragments creating islands and riches. It's so easy to wrap a mysterious sonar shape in these old stories. It's also very telling which stories we reach for first. But we're not finished with the science just yet. Before we let myth take over completely, there's one more piece of evidence to weigh. The rock itself. Samples were carefully lifted from the anomaly and the surrounding area. They were sent to laboratories. Under the gaze of a microscope, the grand story becomes granular. The romance of a dark, mysterious shape on a screen gives way to the reality of quartz and feldspar grains. Two textures carved by ancient glaciers, and two coatings formed over millennia. The answers these tiny fragments offer might not be final, but they are firm, and they point us in a direction that truly matters. They say, seeing is believing. On the deck of the Ocean X vessel, cold, hard rock was a lot more persuasive than any rumor swirling in the salty air. The team managed to bring up fragments from the depths, some from the anomaly itself, others from the surrounding seabed. These weren't just any old rocks. They were handed over to geologists, people who spend their lives looking at stone so closely that they can read them like books. The first question was simple: what? Orite. The lab results came back. Granite, gneiss, and sandstone. All common, run-of-the-mill rocks for this part of the world. The Fenniscandian Shield, which is the ancient bedrock foundation beneath the Baltic Sea. But there was something else. Some samples had a dark, fine-grained coating. Geologists call this a rind, a layer rich in manganese and iron oxides. It is the kind of thing that forms over immense periods of time when the water chemistry is just right. This rind can be slick, almost slippery, and so black that it looks burnt, even though no fire has ever touched it. A few pieces even looked like basalt to the untrained eye, dark, tough, volcanic. But under the microscope, the story changed. They weren't formed from cooling lava. They were metamorphic, shaped by intense pressure deep within the earth. This collection of rocks fits perfectly into a glacial narrative. Imagine a massive granite knob sticking up from the seabed. Over millennia, glaciers would have scraped over it, depositing stones on top, maybe even cementing them in place. This could explain why it felt like a tabletop scattered with dishes. The steps, those could be layers of sandstone, where the harder rock withstood erosion better than its softer neighbors. And those slick, dark patches, just chemical crusts that formed over eons. No alien technology, no celestial lathe required. You might remember some of the early headlines. One scientist was quoted talking about black basalt. He later had to clarify that he was speaking casually. The rocks, looked volcanic, but they absolutely weren't. There hasn't been any volcanic activity in the Baltic for a very, very long time. But headlines love to trim the details, don't they? The nuance gets lost. Fascination gets amplified. Caution becomes a footnote. And let's be honest, footnotes are never as exciting or shareable as a jaw-dropping mystery. So, if the anomaly is just ordinary rock, why the extraordinary shape? This shifts the question from asterisk, what asterisk it is, to asterisk, how asterisk it got there. It becomes a problem of geometry and natural processes. In the world of geology, there are plenty of ways nature can create circles. Cracks can form in granite that peel off layers like an onion, creating circular steps. The constant freezing and thawing of water can wedge into fractures, breaking off segments and leaving a scalloped ring. A large slab of rock can be undercut by currents until it slumps and collapses. If that slab is roughly round to begin with, the result is a broken circle. Over time, fine sediment could drift down and smooth the top, only to be washed away by storms, leaving bare patches that look like plazas. Every scientific test seemed to point in this direction. Sediment cores from the nearby seafloor showed no ash, no strange chemicals, nothing that would suggest a high-temperature event. Magnetometer sweeps found no magnetic heart humming beneath the stone. The anomaly, through every test they could throw at it, seemed to insist that it was just a piece of the local geology native to the area, just unusually theatrical. And yet, You can't quite shake the feeling, can you? The ROV's lights glided along edges that looked incredibly clean, almost unnaturally straight, like a fresh fracture in a piece of stone. The diver's hands ran over surfaces that felt smoother than the surrounding muck. And that runway, the long, scoured track leading to the disket, just begs for one more question. Was that track carved purely by water currents? Or did the unique shape of the anomaly itself focus the flow of water, amplifying its erosive power? In other words, did the anomaly create its own mystery simply by being a shape the sea could unresist sculpting into something spectacular? What the rocks really tell us, then, isn't a simple alien or ordinary. The answer is complicated. It's a story of a bedrock boss shaped by ice, a ring of fracture plains, a cap of glacially transported boulders, and a streak scoured into the seabed by currents. You can name all these geological elements, and you should. But you can also hold on to the wonder that, out of a landscape of scraped plains and scattered stones, a circle emerged, a formation so distinct that it made even the most jaded among us look twice. But there's another layer to this story, a chorus we haven't fully explored yet. It's our own human habit of projecting myths and legends onto the unknown. The Baltic Sea is steeped in such stories, a deep well of folklore and history. When a mysterious disk is found on its floor, it naturally gathers these stories to itself, like moss gathering dew. So let's step into that world of myth, not to replace the science, but to understand how our own minds work, to illuminate the places where the seafloor is dark and the answers are not so clear. Give a human a circle, and they'll find a meaning. It's how we turned labyrinths into prayers, and Stonehenges into calendars. In the Baltic, that meaning often sails in on a boat and stays anchored by rumor. When that sonar image emerged in 2011, it slotted perfectly into a story that was already waiting online. A narrative of unexplained shapes, secret underwater bases, and technology far beyond our own. The fact that it looked suspiciously like a beloved spaceship from a famous movie certainly helped. A few fan-made renders, and the nickname UFO did the rest. It's easy to dismiss that first wave of excitement now, but it's just as easy to forget why it happened in the first place. The sea is a realm of profound uncertainty. You're staring at a screen, watching pings of sound transform into patches of light. You know, from hard-won experience, that real shipwrecks have been discovered exactly this way. You know that solid oak and copper fastenings have been pulled from the depths because of these same ghostly images. In the half-light of a sonar scan, to leap from odd-looking disk to man-made object is much shorter than it is under the bright stereo lights of a laboratory. And it wasn't just modern pop culture fueling the fire. Ancient myths from the region had already laid down the templates. There are tales of Veneta, a legendary sunken city whose bells are said to still ring under a certain moon. In some versions of the story, a fisherman hears them, loses his way for a day, and returns with a distant look in his eyes, mumbling about streets of light shimmering beneath the waves. Then there's the story of the Sampo, a mythical, magical mill that churns out riches, which ends up in a struggle at sea. When it shatters, its pieces scatter wealth into the water. In the island world of the Baltic, with its thousands of islands and rocky skerries, it's not so hard to imagine a circular machine. A piece of that cosmic mill lying silently on the seafloor where boats would later pass. Layer onto that the newer folklore of the 20th century. Strange lights in the sky, unexplained radar blips, submarines spotted by farmers in the fog. The Baltic was a chessboard and a hiding place during the Cold War. Stories grew like algae around both real military tests and imagined ones. So, when a round ship appears in a quiet corner of this historic sea, it catches the crossed beams of both old and new stories, and it lights up, white-hot, with possibility. Of course, scientists and skeptics urge caution, and they're right to do so. They point to pareidolia, our brains, incredible, and sometimes misleading, hunger for patterns. It's what makes us see faces in the clouds and ships and rock formations. They remind us that if you were to drop 1,000 straight lines randomly across a map of the coast, a few would inevitably connect 3 ancient sites, and you'd swear you'd discovered a mystical ley line. They walk us back through the technical details, the tricks that sonar can play, the strange habits of geology, the way our minds instinctively read steps into what is merely a fractured ledge of rock. They aren't the enemies of wonder. They are its guardians, protecting it from quick and easy disappointment. And yet, these stories still have their own work to do. A myth doesn't have to be literally true to be usefully honest. The Baltic Anomaly became a public stage where the deep tension between hope and hard evidence played out for everyone to see. Some people wanted a world-changing revelation, and when they were presented with simple granite and gneiss, they felt as if the world had somehow failed them. Others wanted it to be nice all along, and when they heard tales of flickering lights and strange phenomena, they felt that wishful thinking had contaminated the science. But perhaps the better lesson here is a slower one. That the world is full of beautiful, fascinating riddles that ask you to love them even when they're made of perfectly familiar things. You can stand on the shore, breathe in the salty air, and instantly understand why a circle at the bottom of this particular sea feels so charged with meaning. The Baltic is a basin of threshold sits, where freshwater rivers meet the salt, where land meets water, where the low winter sun gives way to the midnight sun of summer. The shape of a circle here cues ritual. Think of the rings of stones on the islands where ancient dances mark the turning of the year, the round nets that rose from the depths, heavy with herring, the round, curved keels of ships slicing through the choppy waves. The anomaly simply repeats a shape that the region already knows how to honor. We will descend to the anomaly one more time before we're done. But before we do, there's another layer we need to explore. The environment itself. The Baltic Sea's unique physical characteristics. Its distinct layers of water, its oxygen-starved deeps. Its slow and gentle currents have a profound effect on both the anomaly and our experience of trying to study it. Some of the stranger reports and instrument readings may become much more understandable when we view them through that specific lens. The Baltic Sea isn't a single, uniform body of water. Imagine it as several layers stacked on top of each other. Lighter, fresh water flowing from rivers forms a blanket over the denser, saltier water that pushes in from the North Sea. The boundary where these two layers meet is called the haloclines. It's an invisible, shifting mirror, wobbling with the seasons and storms. Below this layer, the environment changes dramatically. Oxygen levels plummet. In this low-oxygen world, bacteria that don't need air to survive go about their patient work. This is why wood can persist for centuries on the Baltic floor. The usual wood-boring organisms simply keel and breathe down there. In some deep basins, the bottom is an anoxic or completely oxygen-free hush that operates by its own set of rules, and the anomaly, our mysterious object, sits right near this silent, oxygen-starved zone. The very nature of the sea itself becomes a central character in this story. Sound behaves strangely in this layered environment. It bends as it passes through the halocline. Sonar systems have algorithms designed to correct for this bending, but a messy, shifting halocline is a natural trickster. A sonar ping that should travel straight down and bounce directly back might get skewed off to one side. This means if you make two sonar passes from different directions, you might end up with slightly different outlines of the same object. It is a major reason why seabed images are never perfect matches, and why oceanographers rely on multiple, careful surveys to build confidence in what they're seeing. The fact that the OceanX team S-shape remained consistent through all these environmental quirks added significant weight to what the divers would later touch with their own hands. Electronics and the sea have a complicated relationship. They hate the cold and the wet. Humidity on a ship's deck can creep into equipment housings. If a single seal fails, a sensor might give one last, bizarre reading before it dies. Batteries lose their power when they get cold, and cameras need a steady current to function. Even a boat trying to stay still for a dive can drift dozens of meters, moving in and out of pockets where radio signals work 1 minute and fail the next. None of this disproves the possibility that a satellite phone genuinely failed at a critical moment, but it does show how easily such an event can be woven into a narrative of strange magnetic forces and otherworldly interference. And speaking of magnetic anomalies, they aren't as exotic as they might sound. The Earth's magnetic field naturally twitches and sags. A large iron structure, like a shipwreck buried in the sediment, can easily tug a compass needle a degree or two off course. Certain geological formations, rich in minerals like magnetite, do the exact same thing. If a piece of bedrock has a seam of iron running through it, A compass will notice. When a diver reports feeling a buzzing sensation in his arm, it could be his nerves reacting to the intense cold. It could be a mild electric field from a leaky nearby cable. It could even be a psychosomatic response, born from the expectation of finding something strange. Or, just maybe, it could be something else entirely. The sea is never interested in giving you a simple list of causes. Even slow-moving currents have the power to sculpt the seabed in dramatic ways. When water flows around a hard object, the velocity increases around its edge. In its wake, eddies form, like swirling braids. Over many years, these currents carry away the finest sediment, leaving behind a trail of coarser pebbles and gravel. On a sonar scan, this can look just like a deliberately constructed path or runway. The runway seen behind the anomaly doesn't need an alien craft to have carved it. The water itself can do that work, given enough time and a solid disk to flow around. The chemistry of the seafloor also creates its own unique textures. In areas where oxygen disappears, sulfur bacteria take over, laying down strange films and splotches across the mud. Where iron leaches out of the rock, the sediment is stained with rust. To a mind already primed for a UFO story, dark patches on the seabed might look like scorch marks. But to a geologist in a lab, they suggest manganese deposits or a kind of biological varnish created by microbes. And remember, a diver's flashlight casts a narrow, focused beam, which can dramatically exaggerate contrast and make a varied patch of sediment look like a single, uniform, burned area. The cumulative effect of learning about the sea's complex personality isn't to demystify it, but rather to deepen our respect for its complexity. Every instrument has its own quirks and temperaments. Every environment has its own voice. When a story like the Baltic Sea Anomaly emerges, it's crucial to recognize who else is speaking besides the object itself. The instruments, the water, the weather, and even the human bodies of the divers. They all have their own lines in this script. Which brings us to the quiet turn. At the end of this chapter, after all the sonar pings and the cold dives, after the media frenzy and the lab reports, a disc-shaped object remains on the seafloor. It is most likely a natural rock formation, a glacial deposit shaped into a nearly perfect circle by ice, chemistry, and immense patience. But it is also, without a doubt, a teacher. It teaches us how Izali wonder can proliferate, how the sea can conjure a perfect circle out of random noise, and how a modern myth can find its stage. So what should we do with a mystery that, when held up to the light, reveals itself to be mostly rock, but still feels like a powerful story? When a question doesn't resolve cleanly, it's helpful to ask what it has already given us. The Baltic Sea Anomaly hasn't revealed a buried starship or an ancient machine. Instead, it has revealed the way our eyes, our tools, and our histories get tangled when we peer into the dark. It has made the Baltic Sea geology visible to people who had never even heard of roaches' mountains or exfoliation joints. It has turned a lesson about haloclines and sonar into casual evening conversation. It has given divers a place to test their composure at depth and geologists a chance to gently explain that, yes, granite can be that strange. The disc on the screen will always look like an invitation, and that's a good thing. An invitation isn't a lie. It simply says, come, learn how ice writes its history on stone, how sound draws pictures in the dark, how light can deceive us about darkness if we let it. It teaches us how the stories we already love will race to fill a shape we don't yet understand. It says, you can hold mythology and mineralogy in the same hand without crushing either one. The Sampo, the mythical artifact, can grind in the heart of legend, and a granite boss can sit silently under 85 meters of brackish water. The two can share a certain music without being the same instrument. We live in a time that seems allergic to uncertainty. Answers are the currency. Mysteries are treated as clickbait until they are solved, at which point many people simply walk away. But the deeper pleasure is to stand with something that resists a single-sentence explanation. The anomaly is almost certainly natural, and it is certainly marvelous. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The sea doesn't owe us artifacts that meet our fantasies exactly where they live. It owes us its own stubbornness, which is just another way of saying its integrity. So, let's imagine the boat again, the duffish, whispering through the cold, dark water. The ribbon of grayscale imagery unrolling across a computer screen. Imagine the breath held in that moment when a roundness clarifies itself out of the digital noise. Imagine the diver's slow descent through the layers of water, the immense weight of the depth pressing like a hand at the back of the neck. Imagine the spread of a palm across a surface that has been in darkness longer than human memory. Imagine the small glitches in the equipment, the lab microscopes examining rock samples, the anticlimax for some, and the deep, quiet satisfaction for others. These are all pieces of a good story. They don't require an artifact from another world to be worthy of our attention and our care. Now, I have a question for you. When you first saw that sonar image the disk with its runway, what did your mind make of it? Did you immediately leap to a crashed spacecraft, an ancient temple, or a strangely carved stone? Did the later geological explanations dull the charm for you? Or did they add a new layer of texture to the mystery? If you could choose, would you want the anomaly to be wholly and completely explained, just a named outcrop in a geological catalog, or would you prefer it to remain where it is now? A circle that continues to teach us the value of patience. Share your thoughts in the comments. If the Baltic Sea Anomaly drew you in, what other mysteries on the world's seafloor pull at your curiosity? Are you fascinated by the Caribbean's deep blue holes, the perfectly preserved ancient wrecks in the Black Sea's anoxic waters, or the drowned forests off the coast of Leave a comment with the mysteries you'd like us to drift over next. If you enjoy these long-gone journeys between fact and wonder, please like this video, subscribe, and ring the bell so you'll know when we cast the next line. Until then, hold the image of that round shape in the gray water and let it remind you. Even ordinary rock can feel extraordinary when we meet it at depth with our full attention.